Hello friends, welcome back. Very excited to see you in my bibliobar once again. I realised that we have not had a drink together for a while, and in this salon, in which we're going to celebrate Frida Kahlo with the wonderful Kiruna Stamell as my special guest, I thought we would start off with a drink. I am drinking a bit of mermaid sea salt vodka. Yes, it's a sipping vodka. I'm going in neat, people. Chin chin, push hearts. It's very nice. And I think I handled that like a grown-up who can sip vodka. The mermaid theme... sorry. The mermaid theme ties to my promise to you last time we met to talk to you about the pictures that I'm sitting under and around. The mermaid on each side of us and the dragon atop. And I will now tell you, without any more of that just for a minute, I will now tell you why where this story comes from. And I'm going to do a little bit of a cheeky secateurs into the fact that, as some of you may know, I am now a published authoress in my own right, which is obviously something I'm ridiculously excited about. Can't stop getting drunk and just cuddling the book. But anyway, so this is a book that co-authored with me and Kate Kerrow, whose work you've seen in lots of our earlier salons, and it's about the women we interviewed at Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, and the story of the camp told through their voices. There's over 60 women's experiences in this book. It was an absolute joy to put together, and it's amazing to have you on a book. But before I wrote that book, I was about 11, and I wrote a book, obviously handwritten in my bedroom. I want you to remember that when I tell you I was 11, not 5. I was 11. Most people were like, getting ready to start dating boys and things at this age. Not me. I wrote a book called The Truth in Magic, all about how you could make friends with mermaids and dragons, where they lived in Cornwall, what their characters were like, how they were actually very safe, and all the mean stories about them were just propaganda and slander, and how you could befriend them if you knew what to do. You're welcome. I don't know if the History Press would like to get in touch and publish my juvenilia, but yeah, funnily enough, it didn't get into print, but it did get into the hands of a friend's artistic husband, who did these beautiful watercolours that I'll take some photos of a bit closer up so that you can see in a bit more detail on our social media the really lovely work that he did that was inspired by the truth in the magic. So there you go, that's the story about these the watercolour illustrations you can see behind me of sunsets and seas and magical creatures. So moving swiftly on to Frida Kahlo, it does tie in because of course she's very much about she created her own mythology. She's a remarkable woman. The interview that I'm going to share with you is between me and Kiruna, covers a lot of our interest in her, both as a woman strongly presenting her own image, that was then taken on by our culture, and she's kind of become a mythology and an icon in her own right, that sort of sets her art and work aside, apart from other people's, and also culturally, I think, but also in terms of feminist context. And of course her famous relationships and her approach to relationships is as much part of her story. What's nice is it's a part of her story, but her art is never overshadowed by any of the parts of her story, and it's very rare that when we talk about a woman we can say that, I think. So I'm going to sing you a quick song an homage to the kick-ass women that we're talking about today, Frida Kahlo and then Kiruna Stamell, who's also very awesome. And it's again by the wonderful voice of the Beehive. I promised I'd do, for the next couple of salons, do my favourite of their songs. So this is a song that you probably, hopefully will know and should know, and that I have loved since I was a teenager, not long after writing Truth in the Magic. Anyway. Don't call me baby while she is waiting in the car. It took so long to get this far. Don't call me baby. You said forever, and then you went and changed your plans. You said that someday I would understand, but I still wonder. I wonder why we are not walking and fighting and asking for favours, meeting at midnight while avoiding all the neighbours. Time is a distance that you can't retract by miles. If I saw you again I'd smile, but I'd say don't call me baby when she is waiting in the car. It took so long to get this far, don't call me baby. I think she's pretty, and I think that you have done quite well. I still say you can never tell, I wouldn't be surprised. You never know, we could be walking and fighting and asking for favours, meeting at midnight while avoiding all the neighbours. Time is a distance that you can't retract by miles. If I saw you again, I'd smile, but I'd say don't call me baby when we were not the way we are. It took so long to get this far, don't call me baby. Sometimes downtown I think I see you, but I don't say a word because there is somebody new. It's too late to matter, there's no such thing as true. You were in the shadows till you left me in the dark. Don't call me, don't call me, don't call me, don't call me baby. Don't call me baby. Don't call me baby. Don't call me baby. So, I'd like to welcome you now to an interview that I gave with Kiruna that Charlotte Cora actually happened, and to my enormous joy, in real life. So real life that you'll hear my dog breaking into it to annoy squirrels and things like that. But it was amazing to have her in the lockdown library, and I'm going to let that interview play out so we get the most of her words and comments. So this is the last time you'll see me for this salon, and then it will finish, we'll play out with her Kiruna's own interpretation of a piece of visual and audio art that she's made for us, especially inspired by the works of and around Frida Kahlo. And I'm very excited to share with you now. Thanks so much. See you soon. Push hearts. Hello, this is very exciting to have you here in real life. We haven't done an interview like this.
I know, we thought we'd use this as an excuse to get out, so came down to visit.
It's so cool. This lockdown library is usually me in front of this gold screen with its little birds and painted sort of cherry blossoms all on my own. But I'm here today with Kiruna Stamell. I'm very excited.
Hello.
Could you introduce yourself?
I'm Kiruna. I'm wearing a Frida Kahlo inspired dressing gown, which I just got online from Etsy. And one of the things I thought was interesting, because because you offered me two choices, do you want to talk about Rosa Parks or Frida Kahlo? And it was literally the fact that I had Frida Kahlo placemats in my house, which I think I bought years ago from Amnesty International, that I was like, I will talk about Frida Kahlo.
But that is actually like a way she stayed. That is Freedomania, they call it, don't they? Has her to be such an icon, not just to have created iconic art, but to be that kind of icon that we are wearing her in dressing gowns.
Yep.
You know, I've got her on socks. You know, she lives in a very unusual place, particularly for a female artist.
Yep.
Not just a female sex symbol.
No, because I think she's interesting in that she's a beautiful woman, but she's also, she's not stereotypically feminine in the kind of Hollywood mass markety kind of sense, yet she really found, her place. And we've got things that everyone will, think of, like the monobrow, the sort of hirsute lip, and also I also associate her, and part of it is because of her actual artwork, but so much of my impression of Frida Kahlo is all of the pop cultural stuff that's kind of come out over the last few years, like, this dressing gown, the placemats, a set of tumblers, posters, you can go on any online shop, your Amazon, your Wayfair, whatever, put in Frida Kahlo, and stuff comes up. Like, there was a Frida Kahlo colouring book. Oh, there was a paint by numbers set, and I would have bought it to incorporate into the performance piece that I'm going to do, but it wasn't going to arrive in time. But I was like, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But in a weird way, because you're like, does it cheapen her art? And I think actually no, it's an accessible route into her art.
Yeah, especially she created her own style of art.
Yeah.
Since that's why I'm so interested in her in relation to this season of Salons, where we're looking at women and whether they have a projected image that they've created themselves or other people have projected onto them. And she's kind of both. We're now projecting stuff onto her and using her image and all that sort of thing.
Yep.
But actually, she totally took art to create her own image through and created not her own style of art, but also her own image and persona of herself.
I wonder if that's because being a woman and being, you know, particularly in the beginning of her career in Diego's shadow, whether that there was a sense of nobody's looking at my stuff. So actually I will just do it for me.
Yeah, she talks about that being on her own as a child after her polio. She's been bedridden for a very long time. And she says there was no one looking, and I was on my own a lot.
Yeah.
So I painted what I could see, and I could see myself, and I could see my school friends, you know, and I could see nature, and that's how she kind of creates. And that never leaves her, which is really interesting, because to position yourself at the centre of your art so successfully, to the point where I do find it I love the fact that she's way more famous than her.
Oh, I love that she overtook him, because he, I don't know. I mean, this is me being really superficial, but there's that sense of, I'm sure his collages were great. People really, really liked them. And he was commissioned a lot. I'm sounding so bitchy. Commissioned a lot to make them. But I think being a man of the time, he was also able to kind of get away with just being a bit, I'm going to sound so superficial, blobby. Like he's
that famous art term, blobby.
Like he's just a bit, I don't know, there's something about him that a woman couldn't get away with dressing or looking or being like him, you know, without lots and lots of judgment. And she kind of, you know, what he was referred to as the elephant, she was the dove.
Yeah, by her own parents.
By her own
who
parents.
were not delighted with their
May
to December marriage.
They kind of had his number, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
You know, I imagine they had quite an intense relationship with one another. I mean, it's documented that they did.
Yeah.
So something really drove it. But I think it's interesting that her parents were a little bit like, well, you know, it's your life.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they must have felt horribly validated when he sort of worked his way through her younger sister as well.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, you know, he just, he was a prolific lover. I mean, so was she, though.
Yeah, and I like the fact that she weaves that into her work.
Yes.
Like all the use of sort of monkeys, and you can probably hear the little trotting around of my dog. Just trotting around, sorry. That's my dog barking at squirrels.
You get the squirrels.
She was also surrounded by
squirrels,
dogs, parrots, she had squirrel monkeys, weren't they? Spider monkeys and things like that she liked.
Yeah, and because the animals all had symbolism in her paintings as well.
And I'm sure that monkeys' sexuality and things for her, which is really interesting.
Yes, and I think you've kind of, I mean, you need to know more about the artwork than I do in terms of, I guess, their cultural relevance, because she also had a really deep interest in indigenous Mexican culture. So you're talking Aztecs and Mayans? Were the Mayans?
I think so.
Nearby. I have
correct us in the chat if we're not getting that bit right.
Yeah, please do, because I have to say, I was so bad at geography. My geography teacher allowed me to unofficially cheat by letting me be supervised by my best friend in a room on my own. That was how bad I was at geography, because I think he really just wanted me to get through the course. And he was like, Stacey, will you watch Kiruna do the geography exam? And I'm there colouring things in, and Stacey's looking at me going, I know India's vaguely the same shape as Africa, but they're very different sizes, Kiruna.
And in quite different places on the globe.
And I was, you know what, I think travel fixed me doing that. Flying over to England from Australia and seeing the globe underneath, I suddenly went, cultural appropriation, cultural, assimilation. I suddenly started to understand how important these things are.
Yeah.
But, you know.
But she takes all those elements, doesn't she?
She does.
And actually, I think she's the first Mexican to be in the Louvre.
Yep.
I think the whole part of the fascination, rightly, with Mexican art and culture that still goes through American culture is definitely born out of her really successful New York sort of exhibitions and things.
Yep.
And they still, when they're in their pop culture referencing Mexican
Yes.
art, they quite often are using her, literally
Yeah.
using her in cartoons and things.
Well, I think her, you know, sort of her influences and her style, again, I mean, this is me as a Westerner completely reducing an entire country to things like nachos, enchiladas, Mexican restaurants and all of those things. But in terms of when you think of Frida Kahlo and colours, for example, you can also associate it with a lot of that kind of really commercial, capitalist bastardization, really, of kind of Mexican culture that we sort of see.
Which she really struggled with when she was in America as well.
Because she was
having
wanting
success.
to be authentic. And
and she had success for the first time there. And probably the most success in her life, with her most adulation within her own lifetime, was in that period in New York. But she's also looking at, you know, the desperate poverty. She's looking at the rich who are eating out and dining out and partying every night while thousands are dying in misery and of starvation. And she's shocked by the colonialism and the capitalism. I mean, that you see a woman there who's going to go on and have affairs with Tolstoy and things like that.
Well,
you know,
it's sort of
be radically socialist.
Totally, and you can see sort of, it's all an oxymoron and a paradox, really, too, where you've got the whole Mexican border, you've got America. Again, I keep coming back to the food. They love their Tex-Mex, but there'll be anti-immigration from anybody that's like legitimately coming over from the South. So there's that weird juxtaposition of, oh, we love Frida Kahlo, we love her colours, we love her stuff, and isn't her kind of, you know, native cultural dress sense intriguing, but it's also still simultaneously really othered and kind of rejected as well. Like, who's this weird woman with a monobrow? Like, how dare she be hairy? And, you know, so everything's slightly got a tension around her, because it's like, you know, she's beautiful and attractive, but she's not completely playing the game that other people want her to play, and to just kind of, you know, be a stereotypical
wife,
you know,
apart from anything else.
Yeah.
Like, she does do a lot of, for the first part of it, I'm his wife, and then it's like, actually, that landmark picture where she draws them both and says Frida and Kahlo, and that just becomes this kind of, and then they are sort of referred to that internationally, which is fascinating. How do you think she deals with that duality with her own body in her work? Because that's really fascinating.
Actually omnipresent, really, in all her work. So you've got a brilliant painting that she did called The Column, which deals very much with her disability. So you had Frida's experience of disability and illness ran pretty much all the way through her life. So she had polio, which she survived. She had a bus accident, which she was impaled.
Yeah, through her pelvis.
By a handrail. And impaling is, it's a very kind of particular trauma. You know, it does a lot of damage. So she survived it. You know, they got her back up and about and moving around, but then 20 years later, her leg becomes gangrenous, because it's like there's long-term damage there within the body, and long-term trauma that's within the body. So she kind of, in some ways, what was it that you were saying her friend had said?
Yeah, a really good friend of hers described her as she lived dying.
Yes.
Which I think is really complicated, because I think it, in one way, is a really painful, poignant, sympathetic summation of how much she coped with. Bearing in mind, this is a woman who was, when she was so ill she couldn't get out of bed, had her four-poster bed taken to her own gallery party, and you know, that was really determined to stay in the thick of this life she'd created. But then also, I feel like that sentence maybe is a bit ableist and reductionary about what it's like to live as a disabled person, if you're able-bodied or can't.
Well, in a way, really, we're all living, dying. I mean, we're all...
entropy is a universal truth.
And also, disability will inevitably get all of us. Like, simply living long enough. At some point, something will happen to you, your body or your mind. That's inevitable. And I think one of the things I really like about Frida is how adaptive she is. So, when she died, Diego ordered that the Blue House, which she had also grown up in, so she sort of had lived in her childhood home forever, and, you know, then lived with Diego, not together, they were in separate houses, kind of joined. So they were one of those couples, you know, a bit sort of two separate places, Burton, and then kind of, you know, conjugal visits type things, and dinners and stuff like that. But the
That's
Blue
all
House,
I want with him.
Yes.
I wouldn't want that from him.
Well, it's interesting, you know, because after they got divorced and then they remarried, they had a celibate marriage, where the idea was you can genuinely sleep with whoever you want, we'll be married, but the marriage will be celibate. Whereas prior to that, they were married together, but also sleeping with whoever they wanted. So, you know.
But, yeah, but he was saying after she died, he sealed
Yes,
up.
so he sealed up the Blue House, and it was recently unsealed, and they did an exhibition. And what's really interesting is she had a lot of medical corsets, for example, because of the damage to her spine. Because polio affects bone growth, bone development, and then you've got the being basically stabbed through the abdomen and hip. And so she had a lot of medical corsets that would give her support. And she painted a lot of them, and painted them with, communist symbols or kind of imagery that reflected her attitude to her own body. So she'd had quite a few miscarriages because everything was quite damaged as a result of the accident.
Yeah.
So she was never able to have a child through to full term. And so that was reflected in the artwork. She'd decorated her artificial limb as well, which I really liked. So she had a relationship to her body and her disability, and she was a wheelchair user for a while. And that was one of the things, again, because there's so much ableism in, actually, annoyingly, in a lot of feminist and a lot of academic writing still. It's still quite prevalent, and people would refer to her as wheelchair bound. But actually, if you think about it, if you're not able to walk...
Yeah, you're utilising
a wheelchair is actually liberating.
Yeah.
You know, it takes you out and about. You're not confined to it. It is bringing you to the world.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is, I think, about how you
might as well
look at
call
things.
ourselves car-bound.
Yes.
Although we are a bit...
We are a bit car-bound.
But you know what I mean? Any tools that we use.
Shoe-bound.
Yeah,
trainer-bound.
I'm fire and stick bound.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
That's so interesting about that reclaiming of your... Because I have a long-term kind of quite bad asthma, and when I was a child, very debilitating asthma. And I used to have a nebulizer for if I had a chronic brittle asthma attack. And I can remember an ex-girlfriend doing décolletage on it to make it like personal and lovely to me, so that it wasn't this kind of hostile alien thing that only came out when I was in real critical danger. And it changed my relationship with it.
Yeah.
And I know people who've like later in life developed Crohn's disease or something similar. They're going to be on medication for the rest of their lives. And we've chatted, me and them, and I've said, well, my long-term medication, I take it out of its medical wrapping and I keep it in this little box that I like, that's decorated the way I like. So it just feels like it's something that's special and working for me, rather than something that I feel like I'm bound to.
Well, I think it gives you ownership over something that on one hand you could look at as a ball and chain. But actually, and it's interesting, there's that duality, because the duality runs throughout her work, but it's also liberating you and bringing you life. And I think with her artwork, she had a lot of duality. There was a lot of juxtaposition. So you had, a sexy, great feminine woman who stood by her monobrow and a bit of a, hairy upper lip. You had... the famous painting with the two Fridas, where you had Frida sort of without Diego, joined by an artery to Frida that was sort of bound and in love with Diego. You had, Frida that was, Mexican, and everything was sort of this duality of self. Something was always in juxtaposition. Her identity was... It was always about the intersectionality, I think. It's like she is the embodiment of intersexuality. Intersectionality, Freudian
possibly both. I mean, she's also bisexual, which obviously
so there you go. She's ticking lots of boxes.
Yeah, exactly. Poster girl for everything.
Which I like, because there's something about that which is really very human, because you can't reduce her to one thing.
And she won't let herself be reduced in her art. Whereas so many of the women that we have talked about in this season, and as women in the world, we quite often find ourselves to be reduced to one thing or another, or people are attempting to simplify women down. And I like the fact that she just... And maybe it is that combination of not being looked at so much that she couldn't get away with it until she'd gone really quite far down her own artistic development. And then it's like, well, actually... If you like me, this is what you like. Yeah. And it's all in one way, like you were saying to me earlier, she had this style of kind of these long robes that in some way accentuate the fact that she's very self-like, but that hide things like medical equipment she has to wear. Yes. But then she'll paint it into her work. Yes. So it's this really complex relationship with what you do present and what you don't. Yes. And what and her ownership of that, and her honesty about her mixed feelings. Yeah. Not being like, I have this thing that I'm going to present because I've managed myself into this format. No. Just kind of go, actually, part of this is that it is complicated to be alive, and I don't know how I feel all the time.
No, and I think I like that...
Or I do know how I feel, and it's lots of things.
Well, I really like that sense of her being very organic and very human, And I think, for me, I mean, I identify as a proud disabled woman, that her disability is part of that, because it means she's always an outsider. She was in America, which, you know, at the time was predominantly, the dominant culture was a very white culture. And I mean, you know, that you had apartheid and things that were going on at the time, which you also forget. You know, and she would have been, you know, a woman of colour in that environment, but allowed to have certain freedoms because she wasn't an African American, you know, so she would have had this really interesting perspective on the world around her, even like World War II, which was raging for huge parts of her life, and she was interested in communism and really political, and she had a bit of a Russian point of view on what was going on and what was happening in Europe, and all of the politics around all of that. It's interesting because she's observing it, you know, from a South American, well, the South American continent, so she's observing it from Mexico. She's got a relationship to some of the old school players from the Russian Revolution and things like that, so she's always looking at these things from a really interesting perspective and point of view, and outside of our textbook retelling that I think we often get, particularly, you know, here in Britain. So I find her really interesting because she's genuinely got a perspective that for a lot of us is unique.
Yeah, and she allows her to see through some stuff that is being hailed, like even the surrealists, who she absolutely knows are misogynistic, hyper-intellectual to the point of being disassociated from empathy.
Yes.
She just gets sick of all of them. They're so clever, they're stupid, is essentially what she sort of thinks.
Yeah.
And she hates the way they treat women and things.
Yes.
So she's able to kind of cut
because
through
there's
that
a
stuff.
pragmatism about her life as well. So you've got this kind of, but again, this is me loving disability as a concept, because with disability you've got your theoretical barriers. So the ideology about you're different, you're just a bit rubbish, you're just, these are the ideological prejudices that will be laid in front of you. But also with disability, you've got very tangible physical barriers as well, you know, a world with actual steps. And I think that as a disabled woman, she was always actually juxtaposing the theoretical barriers, the theology, the ideals of communism with what does that practically mean for the body, you know? And I think there's something really grounding in that as well, you know?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
You know, because you've got all these, you know, sort of men around her who would have been like, yeah, you know, free love and equality and, you know, the common man and the worker. And she's like, well, she must also be thinking, if you can't physically do the back-breaking labour or the working on the farm and all of this stuff.
Or
that
free
they
love
would,
gets you pregnant.
Free
and
love
then
gets
you
you
don't
pregnant.
get anyone to help you look after that baby, of course, because they're having free love with someone else.
Yes, Or, you know, they love free love, but only with people that are particularly stereotypically, you know, looking a certain way. So it's not really love, it's just kind of opportunism and lusty capitalist love.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I like her deconstruction of lusty capitalist everything.
Which I just find her really, really very interesting as a person. And it's because you asked me, so I literally went from the placemat to genuinely looking her up.
And
you know,
then
and
we're like,
until that time, I'd only had that really sort of superficial, oh, here she is on a placemat kind of
and
level
once
of
you
knowledge.
start to look and you start to look at her work, you could just...
And I just am so envious of anybody that got a painting from her in the early days, because she would sometimes pay for things by doing an artwork for somebody, because she also didn't have loads of cash, you know.
Because she wouldn't change her style to fit commissioners.
No.
She's a bit like William Blake in that way, that you got to order something and then you go, that's not anything like what that's not my mum in front of the fire, Frida. That's, you know, that's a corset around a tree and a roof. Yeah, exactly right. That's what you're getting. It's a sexy monkey. Enjoy.
Yeah. So it's sort of funny that, you know, there are these people that would have been gifted these paintings that are now worth a small fortune.
And that Mexico doesn't let out of the country anymore, so you can't get retrospectives and whole things together.
I mean, I would so love to. I mean, I can't get to the exhibition that they did of her house because I'm not geographically able to get there. But I would love to have seen what her house was like when they unsealed it. Yeah. You know, because I think it was sealed for something like 50 years. I mean, you know.
Thank God he didn't do a full Ted Hughes on her and actually destroy that work.
No,
because that does happen with surviving male artistic partners all too often.
Actually, no, you're right about that. It was interesting, wasn't it? Because he time capsuled it instead.
Yeah, rather than actually, unlike, you know, Mary Wollstonecraft's husband, or they didn't
get
rid of them.
And I wonder if he... I mean, you know, because it must have been something that she really did like about him. So maybe she did have good taste, because he made a really good choice to seal up the house. And I wonder if whether he sealed it up for the length of time he thought he'd be dead by.
Maybe.
So there was that, maybe, I mean, like, I'm totally making this up now, so totally hyperbole. But I'm imagining now that Diego went, it might be embarrassing for me and I don't think I could emotionally handle it, but her stuff was very good, so the world should see it. Let's seal up the house. I'll probably be dead in about, let's say 50 years. They can unseal it. Her work can thrive, and I don't have to suffer the embarrassment of being a husband that was outshone by his wife. You know.
And on that note, I like to think that's exactly what happened. Thank you so much, Kiruna.
Thank you for having me.
Talking to you.
I think looking at Frida Kahlo, she was such an immense person. We sometimes get lost in the enormity of her and her personality and all the gossip in her life. And I wanted to go back and have a look at some of her original work. So here's a list of all of her paintings, read as quickly as I can, and please do forgive the mispronunciation of the titles. Here goes. The Two Fridas, Henry Ford Hospital, The Flying Bed, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, The Broken Column, The Wounded Deer, Viva la Vida Watermelons, The Wounded Table, What the Water Gave Me, Without Hope, Thinking About Death, Me and My Parrots, The Bus, My Birth, My Dress Hangs There, My Grandparents, My Parents and Me, My Nurse and I, A Few Small Nips, Passionately in Love, Roots, Self-Portrait Along the Borderline Between Mexico and the United States, Self-Portrait as a Tijuana, Self-Portrait dedicated to Dr. E. Loesa, Self-Portrait dedicated to Sigmund Firestone, Self-Portrait dedicated to Leon Trotsky, Self-Portrait in a Velvet Dress, Self-Portrait in Red and Gold Dress, The Frame, brackets painting, Self-Portrait Time Flies, Self-Portrait Very Ugly, Self-Portrait with a Monkey, Self-Portrait with a portrait of Diego on the breast and Maria between the eyebrows, Self-Portrait with Bonito, Self-Portrait with Braid, Self-Portrait with Cropped Hair, Self-Portrait with Curly Hair, Self-Portrait with Loose Hair, Self-Portrait with Monkey and Parrot, Self-Portrait with Monkey, Self-Portrait with Monkeys, Self-Portrait with Necklace, Self-Portrait with Necklace of Thorns, Self-Portrait with Small Monkey, Self-Portrait with Stalin, the Chick, Self-Portrait with the Portrait of Dr. Farrell, Self-Portrait, Coconuts, Diego and Frida, Portrait of Frida's Family, Diego and I, Flower of Life, in brackets, Flame Flower, Four Inhabitants of Mexico, Frida and Diego de Vera, Fruit of Life, Fruits of the Earth, Fu Lang Chang and I, Girl with Death Mask, Girl with Death Mask, Frida and the Caesarean Operazione, Itsu Cradling Dog with Me, Landscape, Living Nature, Magnolias, Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick, Me and My Doll, Memory the Heart, Moses, Pitanaeus, Portrait of a Woman in White, Portrait of Alejandro Gomez Arias, Portrait of Alicia Gallant, Portrait of Cristina, my sister, Portrait of Diego Rivera, Portrait of Donna Rosita Morello, Portrait of Dr. Leo Elieso, Portrait of Eva Frederick, Portrait of Lucha Maria, a girl from Techuan, Portrait of Loop Marine, Portrait of Luther Burbank, Portrait of Marucha Levin, Portrait of McGill in Lyra, Portrait of My Father, Portrait of Natasha Gelman, Portrait of Virginia Little Girl, Still Life, in brackets round, Still Life with Flag, Still Life with Parrot and Flag, Still Life with Parrot, Still Life with Watermelons, Still Life, Sun and Life, The Bride Frightened at Seeing Life Opened, The Deceased Demers, The Dream, in brackets the Bed, The Love Embrace of the Universe, The Earth Mexico, Myself Diego and Senor Xotlo, The Mask, The Suicide of Dorothy Hale, Tree of Hope Remains Strong, Tunis, Still Life with Prickly Pear Fruit, Two Nudes in a Forest, Don Morales, Salvador Yahiminia, Weeping Coconuts, Window Display in a Street in Detroit, Portrait of Mariana Morello Safa, 1944.